Welcome to the Growth Over Grades podcast, where we talk about education ideas and topics that matter most to our Spaces EDU educator community. I'm your host, Melody McAllister, educator advocate for Spaces EDU, your solution for digital documentation and assessment of student learning for all. At the beginning of each episode, I like to feature an amazing member in our community. Today, I want to honor educator Nicole Biscotti. Nicole helps host our monthly PLN Coffee Talk Zoom meetup. She is an author and speaker who focuses on best practices of reaching and teaching learners with ADHD. She and her son co-wrote I Can Learn When I'm Moving, Going to School with ADHD. Nicole is an active member in our Spaces EDU community and regularly shares her work and wisdom on her socials. Thank you for supporting this podcast and our PLN, Nicole. Nicole's work in education has progressed through the years, and she has become a teacher who utilizes strategies that connect and engage with her students and the families who support them. I'll add her socials and ways to connect with her in today's show notes. And Nicole reminds me of today's guest, Michele Jones. Michele Jones is Executive Director of the Alberta Assessment Consortium. Michele, if I said that incorrectly, you have to correct me. When I first talked with, I did all right? Okay. When I first talked with Michele, her transparency of growth truly resonated with me. I'm going to let her share her personal story of growth when it comes to assessment practices, but I know most educators will nod their heads and say, yeah, me too, when they hear it. Michele is responsible for professional development in her role and wants teachers to feel confident in assessing their students without adding to their workload. The word assessment often comes with baggage because it's been used in ways that aren't helpful for students or teachers. But when I picked Michele's brain about formative assessment, she expressed ideas that will help those of us in the classroom focus on what our students need and how we can reach them. I'm so excited for her to share today and know that our listeners will take away actionable steps that will have direct impacts on their students and their learning outcomes. Michele, how are you today? And can you share with us about your background and your personal story of growing in the area of assessment?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, first and foremost. I love talking to anyone about formative assessment, so this is a great opportunity for me. We had chatted earlier about my background and how I accidentally was using formative assessment without even really knowing it. And so, as a young teacher, I was teaching phys ed and social studies and a number of other different subjects at the junior high level. So it was sort of a mixed bag, and I saw a lot of kids every day. And I found that it was, in the beginning, it was pretty overwhelming because
Mhm.
you're just planning for all these classes and you're seeing about 150 kids, uh, you know, sometimes every day, sometimes, every couple of days. And I was so busy that it was enough for me to just manage my class, plan learning activities, and get things done.
Right.
And as I became more experienced and started to manage my time a little more effectively, I started to look reflectively on my practice, which is a big step I think any teacher
Yes.
needs to do. But I would look back and I noticed that by accident, I was bringing the formative assessment strategies that I was using in phys ed, because that's really all you do in phys ed as a teacher. You're coaching kids on
Hmm.
how to improve in a multiple domains. And
Right.
I started to bring that naturally into my academic classes.
Hmm.
And without really knowing it, um, I was using one of the most effective techniques that you can use in order to improve student learning. But it was, like I said again, it was by accident. So the big learning thing for me was, if I had known what I now know about formative assessment, I would have been using it far more intentionally to help students improve their learning, not just their physical ability to perform skills and play games, but their intellectual ability to, grasp concepts and the learning outcomes.
Mhm.
I would have been a lot more effective teacher, I think. I would have targeted different strategies to use with different kids, and I would have kept track of things. But it just kind of happened by accident, and that was a big aha moment for me. It really flipped how I continued to teach after that.
Right. I love that. And I think that most of us, we, if we are self reflective, like you said, that is one very important step that we have to be able to improve the way that we teach. But I wonder sometimes when we think that things come as an accident, like you said, or if it's just the wisdom that comes with teaching over and over and realizing, oh, this works and this doesn't, and this really helped me. And I love that you shared that because it's just a natural way that we progress, like you said, if we are reflective. So that's wonderful. And honestly, when I was a young teacher, assessment, that word was so powerful, it was enough to make me nervous because I think assessment isn't always used in the best light. But we've talked, and can you share a little bit? How can formative assessment help educators when used with purpose?
Well, formative assessment, the research, and I hate that phrase, but the research shows that it is one of the most significant interventions that a teacher can use as a strategy to help students improve their learning, but also improve their instruction. So
Hmm.
formative assessment has a I guess a two-prong win-win situation in that students understand where they need to go to improve, and teachers understand what they need to do to continue to help the student in terms of their instruction and any learning steps that need to happen. So formative assessment to me is the be all and end all. It's it is um, more impactful than summative assessment because summative assessment is often what has already been learned. It's evaluative, it's reported, and often when you have a summative assessment, the learning stops
Mm,
and then you continue on with a new unit or learning experience, and very rarely is summative assessment or are summative assessment results used to improve learning. I guess if it's
mm,
an outcome that lasts all year, but many of our outcomes aren't like that. And if unless a teacher is, again, intentionally going back and asking students to reflect and
right.
look over, the results, then the summative assessment just doesn't help students improve their learning. But again, formative assessment does that, but also
Hmm.
help the teacher.
I love that. How often is how often is it effective to use formative assessment, like during a lesson or during the week?
Well, every minute of every day.
Okay, I knew you were going to
It,
say that.
seriously, it is a ongoing dialogue, a conversation, and whether that's a written conversation or an oral conversation or modeling or whatever. Uh, when you see students grappling with a concept that's maybe challenging them, you jump
Mm,
in and you bring about where their misconception is, or what they've misunderstood or what they're challenged with, and you coach them along and you provide them with next steps. And that's that's the essence of formative assessment. It's in the moment. It's a conversation between me and the student, and it informs us both as to what the next steps for learning are. Formative assessment shouldn't be shared with parents. So, if I've had to coach a child, or if I've noticed that they're struggling with this particular concept, I don't bring up the parent and say, hey, because the minute you do that, it loses its effectiveness.
mm, mm.
So it's really important that formative assessment is that it's a conversation that informs teaching and learning. and it's in the moment. It's between you and the student, or a small group of students, or even whole class.
Right.
And it's yeah, it's most effective when it is stays in the classroom. It's like Vegas. What happens in the classroom with formative assessment stays in the classroom.
I love that you said that it's happening all the time, and I feel like that word formative assessment, it's a long word. It sounds like bigger than it is, but it's something that we're doing all the time and probably don't even realize that we're doing it. And you make that, that's what connected me with you when we were talking, when I was getting when I first met you. So I want to ask you, what are some formative assessment routines that educators can implement?
Oh, so the list is endless.
Okay.
It's just there's just so many to speak to, but we have a session at the Alberta Assessment Consortium that I created, and it's based on Dylan Williams. Uh, he was doing a learning session with myself and
Mm-hmm.
other leaders here in Alberta, and he talked about the 25% rule of assessment, and I was like, "Whoa,
Ooh.
25%! What's this? What's this rule?" Basically, it's 25% detailed teacher feedback.
Mm-hmm.
It's 25% whole classroom feedback, 25% student self-reflection, and 25% peer coaching or peer feedback. And if you look back and examine your assessment practices in your classroom,
Mm-hmm.
and you realize that your students aren't peer coaching 25% of the time, or you're doing almost all of the assessment yourself, then you need to make some tweaks. So another great thing about formative assessment strategies is, again, we're not marking them, right? It's in the
Right.
moment. So it's getting to know what your kids know in the moment. And it doesn't have to be this big, labor intensive, time consuming thing. In terms of whole class, it could be thumbs up.
Mm.
How are we doing? It could be, holding numbers to the chest, which choice you want to make. Let's say it's multiple choice. You can partner the kids up, and you can say, okay, write everything you know about this topic, using letters A to Z, and give
Mm.
them a couple of minutes just to activate their prior knowledge. And then you can do like classroom debates. Okay, I want you to stand up and you ask a
Mm.
debatable question to the kids, and if they strongly agree, they go to this corner. If they agree and disagree, so on and so forth. And then you get them to talk about why they're standing in that corner, and then one person shares that, and that gets your kids up moving, which is beneficial for so many kids. I liked what you said about your community member Nicole this earlier on.
Yes.
Oh, that's beautiful. But it's that same idea. So you get the kids up, moving, you get them collaborating together, and those conversations that they're having are very, very powerful, because we know kids learn better from each other uh,
Yeah.
than they do from the sit and get lecture from the teacher. So I mean, those are great whole class strategies. I have my go-to for routines in terms of group work or small group work would be Project Zero's thinking routines. So a lot of those were developed by Ron Richart and Mark Church, and you can just Google projectzero.com and go to their thinking routines. And oh, there's
Ooh.
so many rich routines there. They're all laid out. They have the instructions of how the teacher can do it. They have some examples, and they're laid out in, is this something you use to get kids activating prior knowledge? Is it something you get kids to do when you want them to pull out multiple perspectives? So it has them organized according to cognitive processes, which is very valuable when we're talking about assessment.
Right.
So I can't say enough about the Project Zero's thinking routines, and 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 the some of the routines that I mentioned, like digital
Mm-hmm.
polling, traffic lights,
Yeah.
right, giving kids whiteboard markers. They can just write on their desk right there. They can
Right.
push two desks together and make their learning visible. And kids walk around. That we call that a chalk talk, or maybe
Right.
gallery walk.
Yeah.
All of those are just simple routines that every teacher should have in their back pocket and use when the moment calls for them to be used.
Right. I love that. I will add the Project Zero and the people that you mentioned. I'll put that in the show notes for sure because it does sound wonderful. Do you feel, I know I didn't prep you for this, but do you feel like your background in phys ed really helped you with this to have like kind of like out of the box strategies too?
Well, I have a playful nature, which is why I was teaching phys ed in the
Hmm.
first place. It wasn't my major, but by being playful with kids in phys ed, not only did I develop really strong relationships with kids that carried over into the classroom, but it just made me more or it didn't make me more creative, but it helped me to become more creative in the academic classroom because I saw the purpose and I wanted to be playful in
Yeah.
academic learning as well as out the soccer field.
Yeah, I love that. And I can definitely tell. I bet your class was so much fun. And when you were talking, I was just thinking of all the things that I would do with my students. And it when you know that you're doing something well and it's like it's not just fun, but it actually goes with science of the brain and learning.
Mm.
It just it's a wonderful thing. Um when you were
It
yes. You're getting me excited, and this excitement about formative assessment. Who knew that it was? We could laugh and smile when we talk about this word, but it is a wonderful thing. You were talking about the 25% rule and about how it kind of like it's not all on the teacher, and that's something that really resonated when we were first talking about formative assessment. So, how can better assessment help lighten the workload for educators? And I know this is really important for you.
It is so very important. It's challenging right now to be a teacher in the classroom, and I know that. So back when I was teaching, back when I was so busy and I couldn't put my head up, I really was developing some ineffective routines that I used, not
Mhm.
only in terms of types of assignments that I created, but also the fact that I marked every little single whip stitch that came across my desk.
Mm.
Kids handed it in, I marked it and threw it up on the Power School grade book. And Dylan William once said, if your Power School grade book has, 20 or 30 marks, he said, you're a lazy teacher. And I was like, what? Because that was my badge of honor. That's, I staggered around the staff room. Well, I've got this many marks in my grade book. What have you been doing all term? But the reality is 5 or 6 well crafted assessments can provide us with more information over a unit of learning than 20 can. In fact, it helps us to uncover deeper learning when we really craft good feedback. Now, are good assessments. Now, here's the piece. If we're crafting only 5 or 6 compared to 20, we're only marking, that number of assessments.
Mhm.
We're only assessing kids that amount of time because sometimes assessment gets in the way of learning.
Ooh,
So we don't have to mark formative assessment yet. Formative
right.
assessment is the intervention that is the most powerful way to improve student learning. Uh, when we get better at crafting better assessments, we're going to save ourselves a lot of time in all that busy work that we didn't need to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes there can be pushback. Where are all the marks in my child's grade book? Like, looks like my kid hasn't done anything. And Dylan William would say, listen, I can assess your kid more, but wouldn't you rather me be teaching them more
Mhm.
and going deeper into concepts and encouraging them to continue learning and to grow than getting them to sit in the desk and choose 1 out of 4 answers in a multiple choice
Right.
test. And many parents would much rather have their kids learning than be
Mhm.
tested.
Right. And I think that the concern with parents often comes with when education looks so different than what they experienced as students. And so they don't understand that. And it does take a patient educator to kind of explain what you just said, because you're right. They do want their students to be their children to be learning. Um, so I want to let you know that those were like arrows to my heart, because I also had a sense of pride with, I felt like with all of these grades, 20 was probably my golden number. I felt like I was really getting a true sense of what my students were doing, but I was always changing them when, when we had to, when report cards came out, because I didn't think that it usually was the real grade that some students needed. Like sometimes it was too low, sometimes it was too high. So what you're saying is when we don't sit there and put every single piece of evidence in there, we're getting a truer picture, and we probably won't have to negotiate those scores at the end, because they will already be true to what the student's progress is.
Exactly. A couple of things with that. Um, if you spend more time on crafting the least amount of questions to uncover learning, you can go a lot deeper. There's if the kids don't understand, you've opened up a lot of time so that with those two or three kids, you can have a conversation and say, okay, so I asked you this question, and this is what you said. Is this really what you wanted to say, or is there
Mm,
something else you can tell me?
mhm,
In addition to that, if we're not marking every little whip stitch, but we're formatively assessing every little every little bit that we can, at the end of the day, your kids aren't going to need those rewrites. They're not going to need those extra
mm.
conversations because they're going to nail those well-crafted summative assessments that you've created because they've learned more because you've used more formative assessment.
Yeah. And it probably looks a lot different too in class when you're constantly seeing where they are, where they know, but you're not doing it in these just these time wasting ways. I don't know that I'm saying it well, but it just seems like it's a better flow of class and class time and learning. So,
Really
I,
is. And
yeah.
a grade book of 20 marks just reinforces with the kid that they're like, let's say it's a 65 student and every mark they get is somewhere between 60 and 70, then it reinforces to them very loudly that that's who you are and all
Mm,
you can do. And that's the last message that we want to send kids.
yeah.
So uh, it's more humane to not assess in a summative way kids. It's more humane to coach them, and through formative assessment, you're developing a lot stronger relationships with your kids, which removes the risk, helps them to feel more free to take risks if they want and try and learn new things. So
Yeah.
there's so many benefits to formative assessment. I can't stop talking.
I know. I like it. You actually helped me understand a little bit more, like that it's, how can I say this? Formative assessment in itself seems so dry, and I think that's the impression that the word can give, or just the, I'm not saying this well, but I feel like it's so rich, and you're giving us insight into that, the richness of it. And when you talk about relationships, and that's the thing that I love most about being an educator, is developing relationships with my students and their families. And then you put the power behind that with the formative assessment, and just all the different varied ways that you can do that. Yeah, like I wasn't putting that together. So I love that you're putting those together in such a fun way. Formative assessment doesn't have to be boring. I when you made me visualize a lot of stuff that I was doing that I didn't even think about as being formative assessment. I love the four corners game, and you're right. Students talking to each other, justifying why they are making a choice, or talking about what they're, whatever justification they have, is so much better than us speaking at them and trying to see if they were right or wrong. It just goes beyond right or wrong, and that's that very shallow
To-
level of learning.
Totally.
Mhm. Is there anybody, you've dropped a lot of names, and I kind of just I'm taking notes. Who are the people that, like, if you are just getting into this and you want to know the research, who are the people that you find out, learn from the most?
Well, I mentioned Dylan Williams is one. Ron Richart is another one. Um, our, my favorite Canadian authors would be Damien Cooper and Ken O'Connor, Katie White, Tom Schimmer. It's
Yeah.
just the list. Like we've got a lot of great educators that are sharing their message,
Hmm.
and those are just a few like Rick Stiggins. Oh, I could go on and on and on about all the authors, but Damien Cooper has just released a fabulous book called Rebooting Assessment, and it talks about bringing technology in, but it also gives a lot of basics for what formative assessment is. It's got video examples, and Ken O'Connor just released a great book on 15. It's a third edition or a later edition of his original bestseller, which was 15 fixes to repair grades. It's just so accessible. Both of those books
Hmm.
are very accessible to learners or to teachers because they're easy to read. And same with Dylan William and Tom Schimmer, they just list strategies right in the book. The teacher doesn't have to hunt and peck for them. They're just right there, which is, I believe, very strongly that that's what teachers, practicing teachers need. They don't necessarily need the theory. They need the
Right.
practical knowledge and clarity in how to implement it the very next day.
Yes, I love that. And I'm a fan of Tom Schimmer. So Tom, if you ever listen to this, yes. And when are you going to write your book? I'm pretty sure that you have a lot to share.
You know what? Um, I don't know if I have anything original other than my own personal experience. I really have learned all of this through those authors that I've researched and read, and I've been able to just make connections to my own personal experiences. So I mean, my personal experiences might be new, but all of this stuff is the work of other people, and I guess my passion is just to break it down and
Hmm.
give it to the teachers who need it in the
Right.
moment and can, run back to their classroom and get excited about implementing it.
Well, I want to just encourage you that I think that your perspective is pretty amazing, and it's just contagious. So if you do decide to write a book, I would love it. I would read it because it almost makes me want to go right. Like school is over, right? For me, it's over. I want to go back in and do some of these things. We are getting close to the end of our show, and I want to thank you so much for being here today. It has been such a joy to talk with you, Michelle. But I always like to end on a note, asking my guest, what is something in your mind, like wisdom you'd like to share with our listeners? And it doesn't have to be about formative assessment. It can be, but it can just be something that you're seeing in the world today that you would just like to share before we say goodbye.
Well, knowing knowing the teacher mindset these days and the challenges that they're faced with, I uh, my words of wisdom are basically just the idea that success is not measured in these grand gestures and deep transformations. It's more about small, meaningful, consistent changes that uh, that not only really work but are easy to do and don't overwhelm the teacher. So make meaningful, lasting changes, and all of those small changes add up to a big win. It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be time consuming. Um, it can be something as simple as all class assessments, thumbs up, thumbs down, and that works. Kids like that strategy. Let's try another one.
Hmm. Yeah,
Keep
I
it
like that. Yeah,
simple.
I love it. And I'm honored that you were here today. I love how you made it so real that we're probably doing more formative assessment than we think, and we don't need to be intimidated by those words. And just you've given us a lot of people to learn from, some of them that we, already know very well. I just appreciate everything that you shared today, Michelle. Um, And if you want to find Michele, she's on Twitter, and I'm going to put this all in the show notes, but it's at Michele Jones 38, and it's just one L in her name. But yeah, so I hope that you look her up. Thank you again, and we will see you guys at ISTE in a few weeks. Find me. I'm actually going to go live with this podcast, Growth Over Grades, there. So look forward to seeing everybody, and please join our community, our Facebook community, where we can have the conversation flowing and going at all times. All right, everybody, take care until next time.
Thanks